Gosh, it would be something goofy because I feel like RuPaul is a goofy bitch, and you know what I mean. Like RuPaul loves to be goofy, and I just like I would probably ask something simple like, when do you feel your goofiest, girl? Like,
Hmm.
because that's one thing I do love about RuPaul is that he's always saying we take life too seriously, and I do feel like that a lot. I do feel the burden of the seriousness of the world that we live in.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of The Advocate Weekly, your go to source for all things LGBTQ plus news and culture, brought to you by Advocate. I'm your host, Kevin Ortega-Rojas, and we have a lot to get through today. This week's headlines include decisions at the Supreme Court to fight for the freedom of an innocent gay man wrongfully deported to El Salvador. This week, we are also joined by Advocate Senior National Reporter Christopher Wiggins to help break down some of these stories, and our special guest is actor and host Johnny Sibilly, who's joining us to talk about his podcast and Season 4 of the hit series Hacks. So, let's get started. We start this week with a landmark legal victory for trans and non-binary Americans. 5 transgender and non-binary plaintiffs won their lawsuit against the Trump administration's restrictive passport policy. The policy, introduced during the first days of the Trump administration, sought to eliminate X-gender markers on U.S. passports and make it significantly harder for individuals to update their gender markers from the ones assigned at birth. This move has been widely condemned by advocates who argued that it would force many people to carry documents that do not reflect their true identities. Represented by the American Civil Liberties Union, the plaintiffs argued that the policy was discriminatory and placed them at risk for harassment, denial of services, and even violence, both at home and abroad. A U.S. district judge agreed, ordering the Trump administration to correct these passports for the plaintiffs, laying the groundwork for future cases to move forward. We're turning now to the Supreme Court, which this week heard oral arguments in a potentially far-reaching case about LGBTQ plus representation in school curriculum. At issue is whether parents have the right to opt their children out of lessons or reading materials that include LGBTQ plus characters, themes, or history. The case originated in Montgomery County, Maryland, where a group of religious parents seek a ruling that will force Montgomery County public schools to offer the opt-outs and perhaps set a precedent for public schools around the country. Supporters of the curriculum, including LGBTQ plus advocacy groups and the ACLU, argue that inclusive education is essential for fostering respect, understanding, and safety for all students, especially those who are LGBTQ plus or come from queer families. They point out that exposure to diverse perspectives helps combat bullying and prepare students for a life in a pluralistic society. The school district, for its part, maintains that the curriculum is consistent with state educational standards and does not require students to adopt any particular viewpoints. During oral arguments, the justices appeared divided. Some expressed concerns about parental rights and religious freedom, while others emphasized the importance of non-discrimination and the educational value of inclusion. The outcome of this case could have sweeping implications for public schools across the country, potentially affecting how LGBTQ plus topics are taught or censored in classrooms nationwide. A decision is expected by the end of the court's current term. Until then, educators, parents, and advocates on both sides of this issue are watching this case closely. To discuss more about what's happening at the Supreme Court, we'll be joined by senior national reporter Christopher Wiggins later on in the show. But when we come back, we'll be joined by actor and host Johnny Sibilly. And we are back with actor, scene stealer, host extraordinaire, badass Latino, Johnny Sibilly. Johnny, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh my God, anytime, anytime.
How you feeling? How you doing?
I'm feeling good. I'm in the car because I'm running errands. You know how it is. But I'm good. I'm happy to be talking to you always. And I feel good. I was so stressed earlier today, and my boyfriend said something like, when someone says like everything's gonna be okay, but he didn't say it like that. He said, "How about everything's working?" I was like, you know
Mm.
what? Everything is working the way it's supposed to be working. So yeah, that helped me get through the day.
That's sweet. Uh, that's really sweet. Well, thank you for making time. I know you are super busy and there's a lot to cover because you are one of the busiest people that I have ever seen. So let's start really quickly. Let's start with Tres Leches, your podcast. You and your fellow co-hosts are were nominated for a GLAAD Media Award. Congratulations on that. I got to see you there. How does it feel to get recognition for this show so quickly, out of the gate? Because some shows really they don't really get that kind of attention, but you have been so well received. It is such a good show. You have such great chemistry. So how does the reception feel, and where did the idea for the show come from?
Oh gosh, the reception, first of all, feels amazing. It feels like, it's the thing we started doing it. There was a couple years there where, everyone started doing podcasts, and I was always like, I don't even listen to podcasts, so why would I even do one? And I remember we were at like having brunch one time, and we were talking, and I just remember like not wanting to leave the two of them because we were having such fun conversation. It was like everything from like fashion to like politics and everything that you talk about with your friends at brunch. And I left there thinking, why why don't we do that? Like that feels like a podcast. That I would
Mm.
do. That I would do. And it just felt really natural. And also, Ian and I have, been online and we've got a little bit of a following, but Juan is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Juan is he's super whip smart. He's got, journalism background. He's got an Emmy for journalism. And I'm just like, he needs to be doing something with this. And I'm like, how great if we could do it together. Um, so that's how it started. And we're also self-produced, so to get that kind of recognition at this point in time when we're not even backed by any like studio or big money feels really nice because it's like, okay, you build it and then eventually they will come. And so it feels like that's what's happening now. And we've just started to make a little bit of money off of the podcast. And it just feels like a labor of love that we started at a time when the strikes were happening, and we just wanted to get together and feel closer.
Your energy and your chemistry together, it really shines through. But what is it that you hope that your listeners, who you guys call milkers, and I don't want to know anything else, we're gonna leave that there. And your merch is incredible.
Oh, thank you.
But what do you hope that your listeners get out of the show?
Well, Juan always says we hope that the listeners leave a little better than they came in. And I just hope that it is an escape. I mean, not that we don't talk about worldly things and like stuff that's going on, but it is kind of like we do like to just kiki and cut up a little bit. I hope that it's one of those things that people listen to and they want to jump in on the conversation, because that's also what we want, is that we want people to give feedback and let us know what they're thinking. We have a segment called Spilled Milk, which is, if people want to write in and give us a little bit of their drama, or they need some advice, or they just want to tell us some good news that they have. We all want the show to feel like a vessel for community in a way, especially for you know Latino gay men, like we are, and just Latine queer people in general, to hear things about like growing up in Miami, or Cubans, and the difference between Cubans and Dominicans, and stuff like that. Uh, I know resonates with people just because I don't know. There's not so much of it out there.
There's none of it. There's none of it. Yeah, which is why I think like and I've had conversations with you, off the record about like the lack of visibility for queer Latinos, and it's like the fact that we're so accessible to each other shows how little of us there are. Like the fact that I can like just hit up Wilson Cruz,
Yeah.
who is an icon, but he's accessible, is because there's not as we see each other because there's so few of us, but there are so many of us out there that like the work is really important to do, which is why I really appreciate what you folks are doing. So when do new episodes of Tres Leches drop before we move on?
So we drop every like first weekend and second weekend of the month. We again, because we are self-produced, it's like, and Juan has a full ass time job. We try and get as much out as possible. So it's every 2 weeks. Basically, it's new episodes, and we just started doing some in-studio shooting, which is just changes the dynamic. I mean, we've all been friends for a long time, and that's also, I think, sometimes why the chemistry works is because we know these bitches better than
Mm-hmm.
anybody. You know what I mean? So it's just really fun, and even touching on what you said about Latinos, like it just feels so good to be able to support each other in that kind of way. We're not jockeying to be number one or first place. And much like Wilson Cruz, like you just mentioned, that's someone who, when I started in this industry, embraced me with open arms and was always like, you're, just very supportive. And so we hope to just kind of model that kind of example.
Yeah, yeah, and I hope everyone tunes in. All right, now moving on to another project of yours that I love, and I've sang your praises. Your show, your logo series. The show was Sip or Spill. It is now called Spill. So what is it like playing the role of host, which now again you're doing double duty. You're doing it on the podcast as well as on this show. What does it feel like to be in front of the camera as yourself and not playing a character? And what do you think makes you such a good host? Because you are phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. It is much harder than doing a character in like a TV show or film or anything like that because it's you. I have such a respect for journalists and I have such a respect for people that do interview like Oprah and Barbara Walters and even like what you're doing. It takes work. Like it's not just, people don't realize that you have to do research. Sometimes I don't get it right and I'm like it's okay. You know what I mean? It's more for me it's more about the connection with the other person. I think that's why sometimes it works is because one, I rarely do I interview people that I don't want to talk to. Um, because sometimes they pitch people and I'm like, I don't care. And I don't and it's no shade to that person. It's just I don't want them to feel that from me. And I also don't want to have to pretend to care about their book. Like I want to like I just like interviewed Sasha Velour and I read her book before interviewing her and she's like, "Oh, you actually read the book?" I was like, Of course I read the book." Like. Um so it's been a true labor of love because it's something I started without even realizing it was going to turn into what it's been because we've been doing it since 2020 when we started as an Instagram live show, and it's just morphed over the years and gets bigger and bigger every time. So it's been really great. It is tough, but it also feels like the easiest job to just kiki with people at a bar.
Yeah, and you were just, or the show was just nominated for an award, so that's another award nominated series that you're on. If you could pick, if anyone would do a rapid fire spill interview with you, anyone in the world, who would you want there, and what is the one question you want to ask?
Oh gosh. I feel like the dream guest would probably be like RuPaul, to be honest. To be honest, like, it is a queer centric show. Um, and what would I ask RuPaul? uh, Gosh, it would be something goofy because I feel like RuPaul is a goofy bitch. And you know what I mean? Like RuPaul loves to be goofy, and I just like I would probably ask something simple like when do you feel your goofiest, girl? Like, because that's one thing I do love about RuPaul is that he's always saying we take life too seriously. And I do feel like that a lot. I do feel the burden of the seriousness of the world that we live in. But sometimes, like even this last season of Spill, I was just reminded by all the queer people, a lot of the queer elders that like Murray Hill and Lena Bradford that like paved the way. They just really showed that yes, life is hard, but you can't lose your fucking smile.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I also read RuPaul's book and I was just like, there's so much to ask about that. So yeah, I feel like Ru would be a perfect guess.
Yeah, there's so many people, and I know that you often take the time to talk about politics online. As you know, it is what I talk about all day long, constantly, and it gets yeah. Well, thank you, and it gets to be a bit much, but I have such reverence for like LGBTQ activists of the past, like everyone who's paved the way. And when you watch videos of, like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha, they were always joking. They were always laughing because they found like joy in the labor of like fighting for equality. They weren't fighting on Instagram about what hashtags people were using, and they weren't like getting on each other. They were just, they were there to find as much joy as possible. All right, now moving on to Hacks, a Emmy award-winning show led by the iconic Gene Smart, which you have been on. Hacks is now in its fourth season. When you joined Hacks, did you think that it would make it to 4 seasons?
Oh gosh, no. It's funny. I Hacks came out of time when we were like still in pandemic. We were all, we didn't know what was going on, and like we all got this job, and we were like, well, we're just grateful to just be able to work. We're social distancing at work, and we have the masks and the thing, but we're just so happy to be here. And there wasn't a lot of the first season. There wasn't a lot of press. We didn't have a big premiere. We had like a dinner together with just the cast, and we really didn't think about it. We were just happy to be working. And it wasn't until the second season and we had a premiere for that because it was kind of like after everyone had gotten vaccinated, where we really started to feel other people enjoying what we were doing. And it was like we'd get stopped on the street. I remember the when it shifted for me was when straight men started to come up to me in person and be like, dude, are you coming back next season? And I'm like, what? I've never been approached by straight men in this way. It's crazy. Um, so yeah, it's been the most. I mean, we love the material and we love what we do, and but to see the way people have gravitated towards it, and even now people still be like, Johnny, I just started Hacks. I'm like, God, how have I missed out on this? And I was like, just come on in, baby. So it's been really nice to see.
Yeah, and your character Wilson has a very he balances work life in a very peculiar way. In what ways are you similar to this character or very different?
Uh, I think that the ways I'm similar to Wilson is that we are very true to our convictions. There's not a lot of kind of like swaying us. We know what we want and we know how to get what we want. But I think I am a little more, I don't know. I would say I'm not as like I've always known what I wanted to do for a living, and Wilson kind of like has fallen into what he does. I think he loves it, but I think, I'm just a little more like ambitious and career driven. Um,
Yeah.
but Wilson is a little more like I need to focus on me. I think he has good boundaries, whereas I could use a little more.
You and I have talked before, many times about the different projects you've been on, and you've been on so many different iconic queer programs, from Pose to Queer as Folk. Now you're on Hacks, and so you have said that being a queer man in Hollywood, you want to play queer roles, and that's really important to you. Is this show particularly special because there's a queer man at the helm of it, and it's such, it's so beloved by queer audiences? Is there something special about that, or something that's significant to you as a queer entertainer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that specifically with Hacks, I think the joy that a lot of the queer actors and writers get out of that is that these characters are just existing in the world. Their queerness is just part of their tapestry. It is not the central point of their story. We're going on dates, we're getting yelled at work, just like everybody else. And it just isn't a thing, you know like we're dating, and and even with Jean's character, who is older, and you would assume that she's not as with it, she's having conversations about bisexuality, and she's not super judgmental or like this. There's not like a whole after school special about the queerness in the show. It just is in the fabric, and that is really refreshing, because a lot of times when it is queer programming, it is kind of like the whole, not to say that that's not part of our journey, but it is
Right.
nice to have a kind of other flavor out there.
Do you think that that is what helps those big straight fans of yours enjoy the show? Is that it's not you're just existing as and they get to see these characters as people beyond their sexual or gender identity?
Right. It's not, they're not being told to identify with these people. They're just being shown these people's lives, and there is things that they can identify with. I mean, some people have chosen work the way that Marcus chooses work over Wilson. Some people, have, lost everything, like Deborah. It's just relatable characters. And I think that's all some people want. They don't want to feel like they're being taught. They just want to feel like they're on a journey with other people. And I think that that's something that Hacks does really well, is that it kind of just takes you on the journey, whether you like it or not. And it's also, there's such diversity in age range on the show too. So it's like a lot of parents will be like watching Hacks with their kids or with their younger, millennial kids, and they can all laugh because it's like it's something for everybody, I think.
Yeah. Well, all right. Before we move on, I was inspired by the Tres Leches promo, which I am obsessed with. The amount of photos that y'all have taken. Before I play this game, so you did a couple of different photo shoots, or you've presented all these different photos, and you're recreating like iconic cast photos. So you've done First Wives Club. I know that you guys did Tu Wong Fu, right? I'm not making that up, right? You did. So what's been your favorite so far?
Oh gosh, I think my personal favorite is the Destiny's Child cover photo that
Okay.
we've done. I'm the one of the three that is
Beyonce.
always, yeah, well, and that, that's a whole, situation. But it's funny because there's three of us, so it's perfect. There's so many iconic threes. Like we even did a picture where it's like speak no evil, see no evil, hear no evil. We did the Destiny's Child, Tu Wong Fu, First Wives Club. We did another one that was a Pedro Almodovar poster, and it's just really an homage to the things that make us as uh, gay men like happy. It's like I love referencing the
Mhm.
past and what inspires us. And the out of the three of us, I am the one that's always thinking about like marketing and like creative in that kind of way. Like when it came to our merch, the we have the 27 plus club because Ian says, he doesn't reveal his age, but he says he's 27 plus. And so a lot of our listeners will be like, oh my god, I say that now at parties. Like people are like, how old are you? Oh, I'm 27 plus. um or Juan one day just calling our listeners milkers, and I was like, oh my god, that would be so good. Like imagine walking into a party and you just have a shirt that says milker. Like I wore our merch out, I think, to just like a regular bar, and like three straight men came up to me and were like, milker, huh? I wonder what that means. I'm like, "Ooh, I love a conversation starter, you know what I'm saying?"
That's hilarious. So before I let you go, I know you have a lot of things to do. We're gonna wrap it up, but I wanted to play a quick game with you. Like I mentioned before, I know for a fact you've always said, "I just want to play gay roles." I remember we had a conversation once. You were like, "I would remake Othello if we could make the characters gay." So I have in front of me a list of different shows and films that are starring female ensembles, which you can choose between these pairs of titles to remake starring gay men or LGBTQ plus people. So the first one, Sex in the City or Broad City, which would you remake?
Ooh, gosh. I would probably do Sex in the City with queer people for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a specific character for you?
Oh, for me? Oh gosh. I feel like for me, oh, I'd probably play like the Miranda role, to be honest. Like I feel like it falls in line with kind of who I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
N-
All right, next up. This is a film. Would you rather remake First Wives Club, which you've already referenced, or Bridesmaids?
Oh my God. Those are so hard. I want to say First Wives Club, but I'm gonna leave that one alone and I'll say Bridesmaids because I can just picture like I'm just like already casting in my head. I'm like Bowen Gang and Matt Rogers and you know even like just the cast from Fire Island, like Tomas, like that would be a funny ass like group of people to take on those roles of like the bridesmaids. That
Mhm.
could be actually a really good sequel to Fire Island where they're gonna get married and now they're all anyway. Yeah,
Call them up.
right. Seriously.
All right, next up, Desperate Housewives, which is a comedy, or Big Little Lies.
Ooh. I'm gonna have to say Desperate Housewives. I would love to see like I would love to see specifically gay men do that kind of like. Actually, you know what? I would love to see a whole trans female cast as the Desperate Housewives. That would be so hot.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
I would
Who would
cast
you
like
who would you
Laverne
cast?
Cox, um, Trace, my best friend, of course, Peppermint, uh, MJ Rodriguez, Mila Jam. Like there would be so like it would be so good.
I
I've
love
already like
that.
there's like I was like you guys need a show all together. That would be so fun.
I love that. All right, next up. This is for your elder years. Would you rather remake The Golden Girls or Grace and Frankie?
Oh gosh. I mean, I feel like they're kind of doing that with like mid-century modern, but kind
Hmm.
of. But I would like to see. I always want to see. I like Grace and Frankie is nice, but it's only two. I like the idea of like a full house of elders. Um, and I'd probably do a cast of lesbians, to be honest. I think that would be really good.
All
Like
right.
Margaret Cho, Leah Delaria, like oh, that would be so funny.
And are you playing a neighbor?
Yes, I would play their friend that comes in everyone. In middle school, I used to have two girls that I used to walk home, two Jamaican girls, and they would always call me Roger. Like remember from Sister Sister? They
Hmm.
were like, "Go home, Roger." I was like, "Oh, I'd love that character for me to just be like the annoying neighbor."
All right, so last one. Would you rather remake Orange is the New Black or Charmed?
Oh, ooh, Orange is the New Black would be sickening in a male jail. Honestly, I think that would be fun. We saw how the girls did it. Like, let's see how the boys do it.
So Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, Orange is the New Black.
All right. All right. Well, I love all your choices. I respect all of them. Before I let you go, can you let people know where they can watch the multitude of projects that you have going on right now?
Well, you can listen to Tres Leches, the podcast, on anywhere podcasts are streaming. You can watch Spill on YouTube, on Logo's YouTube. You can watch Hacks on Max, and everything else, Google it.
We're back, and we're going to discuss California Representative Robert Garcia, who is demanding urgent answers in the troubling case of Andri Hernandez Romero, a gay asylum seeker who was wrongfully deported from the U.S. to El Salvador, along with more than 200 other men without due process or being charged with any crimes. Hernandez Romero had fled his home country to escape violence and persecution because of his sexual orientation, but despite warnings from advocates and legal experts about the dangers that he could face, the U.S. immigration authorities deported him earlier this year under the Alien Enemies Act. Since his deportation, he has reportedly been detained in a notorious Salvadorian prison, raising concerns for his safety and well-being. Congressman Garcia, himself an openly gay immigrant, has taken a leading role in advocating for him. He recently traveled to El Salvador with a delegation of lawmakers demanding proof that Hernandez Romero is alive and being treated humanely. The congressman has also introduced legislation aimed at strengthening safeguards for LGBTQ plus migrants who face disproportionately high rates of violence and discrimination and even death in many of their home countries. This case has drawn attention to the broader issues of how LGBTQ plus people are treated in the U.S. immigration system. Finally, we turn to a development from the Department of Health and Human Services. According to a leaked draft. The federal government is proposing to eliminate funding for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline for LGBTQ plus youth. This hotline, operated in partnership with organizations like the Trevor Project, has been a lifeline for countless queer young people in crisis. The proposed cuts come at a time when LGBTQ plus youth are facing unprecedented levels of mental health challenges. Studies consistently show that queer and trans youth are at significantly higher risks of suicide attempts compared to their peers, due in large part to stigma, discrimination, and lack of support. The 988 Lifeline has provided a safe, affirming space for young people to reach out to for help and connect with trained counselors and access critical resources. Now, the Trevor Project and other organizations have pledged to continue their work, but say that government support is essential to meet the growing demand for these services, and they are urging Congress to reject these proposed cuts and to fully fund mental health resources for LGBTQ plus youth in America. When we come back, we'll be joined by senior national reporter Christopher Wiggins. And we are back with Advocate senior national reporter and a frequent guest on the Advocate Weekly, Christopher Wiggins. Christopher, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for not getting tired of me.
You are my favorite person to talk to. So we have a couple of different things going on at the Supreme Court. It is honestly kind of crazy how many LGBTQ plus issues are at the Supreme Court, how many decisions we're waiting on. Do you find it kind of, I don't know, should we have expected this? Just in a broad scope, like even there are things that we won't even, get into today necessarily, but there's so many things that have been taken up to the Supreme Court, from, the military to healthcare to education, gender affirming care. Are you surprised at the number of LGBTQ plus issues that are in front of the Supreme Court right now?
I'm not really surprised because, the courts are the thing that stands in the way of people's rights being taken away from them after Congress or the executive do something, right? And so the way that Republicans have positioned themselves as targeting the LGBTQ community as somehow violating their religious rights across a spectrum of American life, just indicates to me that it's of no surprise that attorneys that represent groups like LGBTQ kids or teachers or military members or healthcare providers, that they would take up these cases and try to protect those constituencies against these attacks on their rights.
Yeah. And I guess you are right that if we were paying attention to the different fights that people in power have been picking, it kind of makes sense that they were. Do you think that this is I'm sorry to hold us off from our actual conversation, but do you think that this is what the other side was hoping for to get to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, they, you know, they the other side, we call them the other side. The other side, the anti-LGBTQ side, the side that wants to take this country back to a time before many of the people who now have the rights that they have had, they are purposely, some states are purposely enacting laws that they know will end up being challenged in the courts, in order to either have their point of view affirmed because of the conservative bent that the Supreme Court has, or to draw attention to an issue and to scandalize the country over it, right? So, you know, like drag bans and other bans that seem to be flagrantly unconstitutional because of the way that they violate the First Amendment. Those cases or those laws have been purposely introduced and passed in order to get challenges before the court. And so, you know, that's a tactic that the right has used pretty effectively. And I think that the left is waking up to it, you know, the importance of the judiciary, particularly in these times where we have an administration with the Trump administration that doesn't even seem to be listening to what courts are saying anymore.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the Supreme Court case that is involving PrEP. which is a HIV prevention medication. Can you give us just a very broad understanding of what this case is all about?
Yeah, so this case, I broke this news of this case existing back in 2022, I think. Yeah, in 2022, when Braidwood, which is a management group in Texas, and a number of dentists in Texas, um, made the claim that covering PrEP encourages homosexual behavior and that violates their religious rights. And ultimately, a district judge agreed with that, and then the case kind of took on a new life and a scope when the challenge actually became about the constitutionality of the task force that says which things insurance companies have to cover without cost sharing. It's the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, which was established in the Affordable Care Act when that passed back more than 10 years ago, and essentially the the plaintiffs or the plaintiffs in this case, they were seeking um, to have the courts decide that the people who were on this task force were appointed unconstitutionally. They think that because the task force is able to make insurance companies do things that affect the American people broadly, that they should be considered principal officers of the United States, which means they should be confirmed. All of these members of the task force should be confirmed by the Senate, like judges are or like cabinet members are. And so that's what this case is now about essentially deciding whether insurance companies have to cover PrEP, have to cover cancer screenings, have to cover any number of preventive care services that you and I, because we have health insurance, can avail ourselves of without having to pay for currently.
And so, what are I guess this case is sort of a really good example of how an attack on one group of people can snowball into a pretty widespread issue because this doesn't just
Absolutely.
affect queer people anymore.
Yeah.
Though that is still part of the issue, correct? Like this, if this is upheld, and the Supreme Court rules in Braidwood's favor, then what would happen is that PrEP would no longer be required to be covered by insurance companies. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So currently, PrEP and certain vaccines and certain other preventive care services are covered by insurance companies with no cost to the patient, and and covered generally. And so this task force, if the Supreme Court decides that, in fact, their authority is the authority that they're exercising is unconstitutional because they were not appointed correctly, then yeah, people would lose the insurance companies would be able to then not pay for those things and to pass those costs on to the patients, which, as far as PrEP is concerned, although PrEP is available to anyone regardless of sexual orientation, it does affect the LGBTQ community uh, in a higher proportion because more LGBTQ people are aware of and take PrEP to prevent HIV.
And the advent of PrEP and its how widely available it's become in recent years has really helped us lower the spread of HIV among gay men, and the spread has slowed down. So there are a lot of people who are warning that if this does get upheld and people lose their access to PrEP, that this will negatively impact that, and we could see a increase in new HIV cases in the U.S. Correct?
Yeah, and not only that, I want to draw your attention to the Trump administration. The Department of Health and Human Services has recently removed some members of an advisory panel that tells it's a presidential advisory panel on HIV and AIDS. And this is a panel of experts that are not political people, but HHS has decided to purge them. And so I spoke with some of those folks, and they are really warning about the effect that all of these things have when you take research funding, when you take coverage for medications, when you take uh, funding away from preventive care. All of this contributes to a backsliding where, although HIV is more and more under control these days, we could be heading towards a time when more people are becoming infected unnecessarily, and others will suffer because this administration seems to want to go back to a time before it acknowledged that HIV was a problem that could affect everyone.
Right. And I want to highlight for folks how for this administration, it seems like the way that they are approaching health is health concerns or the public health issues that we have achieved some amount of progress on. It seems like they are almost taking that work for granted, and they're like, well, it's no longer an issue, so it doesn't matter. And then things that have become a bigger issue or that we have become more aware of, for example, autism, they're saying, well, this is fake because we're making it worse somehow. So it's really interesting to see their approach to so-called making America healthy again. This week, you were in the Supreme Court to hear oral arguments in this case. So just from your own perspective, how did you perceive the judges to be reacting to this case?
Yeah, so I do have to say, this is just kind of a bit of palace intrigue. I had excellent seating for this hearing,
Okay.
which, if you've never been to the Supreme Court, the press section is kind of on the side, but it's mostly behind these huge columns and curtains. So you mostly have no view of the justices or the attorneys who are arguing, but there are these little alcoves that jettison into the courtroom, kind of like VIP seating, where you can kind of get a front row seat. And for this hearing, I was fortunate enough to have an alcove seating. So, all that to say is, I was able to see the expressions on the justices' faces, right? And I think that is one of the most interesting parts when sitting in the court to see. You can listen to the broadcast of their arguments, but you can't always see them because cameras aren't permitted. The point is, I was able to really see that the justices were engaging with this in a way that, you know, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, they were clearly convinced that this is not a good idea, right? To get rid of this coverage. Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, the two of them actually seem to be receptive of of the liberal argument, and they seem to be very skeptical of Jonathan Mitchell, the attorney who is arguing the Braidwood case. Um, that's to say, I'm not a court whisperer, and I've decided that I'm not good at predicting these things because I always think it's going to go one way and it goes another. Although I might be getting better at it, I don't know. But it does seem to me that the justices are not inclined to get rid of this.
Mm.
Take that with a grain of salt, though, because, like, as I said, I'm not a court whisperer.
Yeah. So I want to get your update on another case, but just to put a pin in this, when can people expect a decision in this case?
Yeah, so that's one of those things where the Supreme Court does a bit of reality TV slash hype buildup, because there's no way to say when they're going to issue the decision on this case. It will be issued before the end of their term, which is in late June or early July. Sometimes they extend it a little bit.
Mhm.
So by the end, by the beginning of summer, we should know which way this is going.
Okay. And then before I let you go, there's a story that you and I have talked about quite a bit, which is the Trump administration's proposal to ban transgender service members from the U.S. military. So, where does that case stand now? What did you hear in the latest court hearing?
So with the trans-military ban, there are two cases. There's the Schilling case that is in Washington State, where a circuit court in California has already upheld a preliminary injunction that a judge there has ordered nationwide against the trans-military ban. So that's one thing. And then the case here in Washington D.C. is the Talbot case, which a district judge, Judge Reyes, has already issued a preliminary injunction blocking the Trump administration from implementing the ban, and the administration has uh, appealed to the Circuit Court of the District of Columbia to to stay that preliminary injunction. Now, yesterday in the Circuit Court, there was argument before a three-judge panel where the Department of Justice was really struggling to explain why it needed the circuit court to pause the injunction, essentially allowing the administration to kick transgender people out and stop hiring transgender people into the military when they provided no evidence for what the damage or the harm would be to the government if this case were allowed to wind its way through the courts to finally decide whether it's constitutional or not to block transgender people from serving in the U.S. military. So, there was a judge, Judge Rao. She seemed to she seems kind of like an Eileen Cannon in Florida, which is to say she's a Trump appointee, and she seemed very receptive to kind of arguments that didn't really make much sense. For example, she asked about whether there are transgender people who don't suffer from gender dysphoria and who do not transition, whether they would want to continue serving in the military in their birth sex. And I mean, if you think about it, what she's saying is, if you're trans but not trans, can you be in the military? So there were kind of side arguments like that she was questions that she was posing, but
I mean,
the
to
two
her
other.
point, to that judge's point, that is what happened with some folks during Trump's first administration, which is people who were either in the middle of their transition or who were about to start their transition had to delay receiving medical care or stop receiving medical care, put off certain procedures because they no longer had access to it. So it is really interesting. Albeit, yes, you are right that it looks like this judge is sort of pandering to the other side's argument. That is something that I myself have considered, which is, what does trans look like to this administration?
Yeah, they seem to have a fundamental lack of understanding, and I think that's what most people on the right, or most people who kind of harbor transphobic or anti-trans views, they have a fundamental lack of understanding of what it means to be transgender. They don't seem to be able to grasp the concept that in nature it is possible that a human being is born in a body where their brain is incongruent with the body that they're born in. I mean, with the diversity that we have in nature and the conditions that exist and the variety of just species that exist, it's wild to me that folks refuse to believe that this is a real thing that happens in human biology. But all that to say is they're making decisions based on, and the judges in the hearing brought this up, on animus, right? The district court judge in DC found that the administration and Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump, they were targeting transgender people because they just don't like them. And what was prescient yesterday, or what was noteworthy yesterday in the hearing, was that the DOJ attorney, Mr. Mannion, who has had challenges in this entire case, um, he struggled to explain, not only why it was necessary to have this policy, but he also just had no way to explain to people what a transgender person was. He said he didn't really know many of the answers to the questions that he was being asked. So, it was frustrating to see the framing that was happening, because it again was based on a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of what transgender people are. But I'm confident that, if the court really was listening and paying attention and recognizing that this was based on animus, that, there is no legitimate reason to uphold this law ultimately, or to step in to get rid of the preliminary injunction now.
Yeah. This is, this has been going on for a really long time, since Trump's first term, like I mentioned before. So it's really interesting, given the fact that a lot of the credit that I do give the Trump administration is this is not their first time, this isn't their first rodeo. And it looks like they have used the last couple of years to really find people who align with their values or will abandon their own to uphold their values. And these are people who are very smart. They know what they're doing. They are not, they're not just like throwing caution to the wind. A lot of what we are seeing out of the Trump administration is a long-term plan that has been workshopped, that has been, practiced at very local levels. So it is interesting to see them enter a courtroom arguing something that began 8 years ago, and they still just do not know what they're talking about, which just proves that there's nothing to support.
And the thing that, is that sticks out the most is that, and this Mannion brought this up in court yesterday again, they're relying on reports and studies that happened prior to transgender people being allowed to serve openly in the military, right? And so and one of the judges also called this out, and she said, has the government done any studies on the detriment, according to the government, that transgender people are to the military, right? You've had years to study this. What do those studies say? And the government attorneys had to admit that they have none of those studies, because those things haven't been studied, because there is no detriment, right? So, that was really, it would be humorous if these things didn't have such serious ramifications on
Consequences, yeah.
people, right?
Totally agree. Well, Christopher, thank you for doing the work and sitting in, these hearings so that we can all get, the rest of the information. Folks who want the stories that you cover can go online to advocate.com to find them. You work really hard, and like I mentioned before, you're one of my favorite people to talk to. So thank you so much for coming back on the show this week. I really, really appreciate it, and I will bother you again soon.
Feel free, bother me anytime.
Thank you. That's all for this week's episode of The Advocate Weekly. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode. Make sure to subscribe to The Advocate Weekly wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to The Advocate's YouTube channel and leave us a comment, a rating, or a review. Until next time, I'm your host, Kevin Ortega-Rojas. Take care. To read more stories like the ones you heard today, go to advocate.com. This episode was executive produced by Kevin Ortega-Rojas. Thanks to our associate producers Kayla Gagnet and Alex Cooper, and Eric Bowie for technical support. And special thanks to Advocate's senior national reporter Christopher Wiggins, and this week's special guest, Johnny Sibilly.